It is Big Ten today. We are presented by Old National Bank on this Wednesday. I'm Dave Revson. Rafael Davis will be here in just a bit. But we are going to start with volleyball. The Big Ten with fully half of the Final Four field. It is the eve of those national semifinals. That is our big story. Nebraska making it to this point for the 17th time. It's the second most of any program. They have lost just one set in the tourney this year, the fewest of any of the Final Four teams. They will face Pitt tomorrow. The Huskers, 32 victories on the year. That includes a program record 21 at home. And they were feeling at home in Tampa, looking at a huge crowd to welcome them as they got off the plane yesterday. Huskers in search of the 6th national championship in program history. Last won it 6 years ago. Played for the title in 2021 when they lost the championship game to Wisconsin. Speaking of which, a quick look at the Badgers. They will face Texas tomorrow, the only Final Four team that is not a 1 seed, the Longhorns. It's the 4th time in the last 5 years that Kelly Sheffield's program has made it to this point. Their lone national title came in that thriller over the Huskers 2 years ago. And the Badgers made their way to Tampa yesterday as well, with their entourage touching down in Florida to similar fanfare. The Badgers' 4-game run through the tourney has also been quite impressive. They have dropped just 2 sets, topping Jackson State, Miami, Penn State, and Oregon. It is Wisconsin's 6th Final Four appearance of all time. 5 of them have come under Sheffield. Emily Eman is covering the tournament for us. She joins us now from Tampa. Emily, let's start with the big picture here. The Big Ten getting 2 teams to the Final Four. We talk a lot about the dominance of this league. I know there was maybe a little frustration on Selection Sunday that more Big Ten teams didn't make it. What does it say about this conference that the 2 number 1 seeds got through and are playing in Tampa?
Yeah, with 2 Big Ten teams in the Final Four, it shows just how strong this conference is. People were questioning only getting 5 teams into the tournament. Is it a down year for the Big Ten? I think what answered that is how deep the teams went in the tournament. You know, once regional hits, the Big Ten had the most teams in the round of 16, in the round of 8, and now 2 teams in the Final Four. Yeah, maybe the conference might be a little bit top heavy, but man, those top teams are as good, if not the best teams in the country. And now with 2 teams here, it just shows that and proves that, I think, to other people who maybe were questioning how strong the Big Ten was this season.
9th time in the last 12 tournaments Big Ten has had multiple teams in the Final Four. You've got Nebraska practicing there behind you. So let's start here with the Huskers. Of course, it has been a dominant season for them, and we mentioned how dominant they've been in this tournament. But if you look at that Arkansas match, I mean, they were really pushed in that first set. They had to rally to pull it out, and then the Razorbacks won a set as well in the match. How important do you think it is for Nebraska to have been tested in that match against Arkansas? What could it mean for them here going forward?
Yeah, that match against Arkansas really proved that they can win against not only an experienced team, but also a team that plays at a very high level. Now, you might look at Nebraska and those results from those first few rounds, those first 4 games, and you might think they just rolled through their opponents. That wasn't the case with Arkansas. That was a veteran team, a very experienced team, led by a bunch of seniors that didn't want their collegiate careers to end. And what we learned about Nebraska is what they've been showing us all season, that these freshmen and that this maybe not undersized team, but underexperienced team is able to win these really high-level games. And they also proved that they can win that defensive battle. Look, Arkansas was kind of coined America's team, being that undersized team outside that everyone loves rooting for. And Nebraska didn't care. You know, they went into that. Those freshmen went in and absolutely balled out. And look, any win in the tournament is huge. And it only helps more that it was against a team that felt like everyone was rooting for, and Nebraska ended up coming out on top despite getting really pushed by them.
Right, and I think probably a good message as well for the younger players, just to kind of remind them, hey, it's not always going to be easy, and it's certainly not going to be easy here in the Final Four, going up against a Pitt team now that has been to this point 3 straight times. How big a challenge do the Panthers pose? What's their greatest strength here?
Yeah, Pitt is definitely Nebraska's toughest test so far this tournament. This is a team that is firing on all cylinders. Their head coach, Dan Fisher, always gets Pitt ready to go. at this time. There's question marks around that team early on, and now they're in their third straight Final Four. This is a Pitt team, though, that doesn't rely on one thing. They're very efficient on both sides of the ball. They're top three in the NCAA in hit percentage, opponent hit percentage, and they're one of, if not the best blocking team in the country. One other thing to note about them is they're similar to Nebraska in that they're actually led by two freshmen. They have Olivia Babcock, an opposite. She was ACC Freshman of the Year. She's an absolute stud. Slowing her down is going to be big for the Huskers. They also have Tori Stafford on the outside, who's another freshman. So look, Pitt and Nebraska line up very well against each other because they're both very good on both sides of the ball. It's going to be a big defensive battle. And I think the key for Nebraska is going to be really settling into this match. This is a stage that so many players on that team have not been in before. So I think the question becomes, can those freshmen and can some of these players who maybe haven't played in a Final Four before, can they really settle in right away and kind of take it to Pitt right at the beginning of the match?
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the youth of Pitt because maybe it offsets some of that youth of Nebraska. But I'm just interested, like on a stage like this, and we've talked all year, we've marveled at these Nebraska freshmen. And again, Pitt not unlike Nebraska in that sense. But they are still freshmen. And do you worry at all on a stage this big that perhaps that catches up with you a little bit?
I think it's a fair question to pose, but what we've learned about this Nebraska team this entire season is that they've risen to the occasion every challenge that they've got. Look, they won on the road against a top 5 team early on in non-conference play. They won a match against 92,000 people, and then they went on to win a 1-2 undefeated matchup against their rival, Wisconsin. Now, look, they might have lost that game at Wisconsin later on the road at the end of the Big Ten season. But what we've seen from these freshmen is they've risen to the occasion every chance they've got. Now, this is just another roadblock for them to say, okay, we can do it at a tournament level too. We can do it at a Final Four level. If I know anything about these freshmen is that they are as competitive as they come. These are matches that they live for, that they've been thinking about playing in since they were young girls. And now having the chance to do it, even talking to some of the players, they're so excited to be here. They love these big moments. A player like Harper Murray, sometimes it feels like she turns it on a little bit extra in those big moments. We saw it in that 5th set the first time they played Wisconsin. She was 7 for 9 with no errors. This is a team that, they might have young players, but they rise to the occasion and they thrive in those big moments.
And we had John Cook on earlier, and he was talking about how impervious this young group is to the pressure and how blown away he's been by that. So kind of speaks to your point. They seem to relish it and thrive in it, and certainly there's a lot of pressure when you get to this point. Let's talk about Wisconsin now, and the Badgers got a challenge as well from Oregon, future Big Ten member, as they played them in the round of 8. And so how about Wisconsin coming in here, coming off a fairly challenging game? What does that do for them mentally?
Yeah, I think that gave them a lot of momentum headed into the tournament. Look, right now, I would say it feels like Wisconsin is the team to beat because they've proven that they can not only beat the top teams, but kind of really handle those top teams. We saw them do it as they swept Nebraska on their home court earlier in the season. But what we learned from that Oregon win was that speed might not be able to beat them. You have this physical Wisconsin team who is not only the tallest, but probably most physical and most aggressive of any team left field and probably any team in the country. So the question in that Oregon match was, can speed beat that? And what we learned was it can. And to beat a team like Wisconsin, you're going to have to out-physical them. You're going to have to outwork them. That's where I feel like Wisconsin maybe has the leg up. And they felt like they gained a lot of confidence in that Oregon win, saying, okay, we're still more physical than some of the best teams in the country.
So how about this matchup with Texas? You've got the last 2 national champs going head-to-head. What stands out as you pair them up against the Longhorns?
Yeah, the biggest thing that stands out is the defensive battle at the net. These are 2 of the best blocking teams in the country going head-to-head. So one thing that I'm really watching for is who can take control of the net, both on, 50-50 balls, maybe some jousts up there, but just from a blocking standpoint. Carter Booth, one of the best middles in the country, she's top 5 in the NCAA in blocks per set and hit percentage, is going up against a player in Asia O'Neal, who is probably the best middle in the country. And watching them go at it at the net back and forth is going to be so fun. And it becomes a question of which team can be a little bit more disciplined in their blocking movements, as both teams are pretty balanced, and then who can really take control right away and really assert their dominance up front defensively. But this one's going to be so much fun because it's a big defensive battle, and it's just going to be a slugfest up there.
an outstanding program in its own right, obviously, in Texas. Been to 11 of the last 16 Final Fours. One of the really cool sidebars in all of this, Emily, is Sarah Franklin. And we had her on when she won Big Ten Player of the Year, and we were talking about the possibility of heading back to the state of Florida for the Final Four, and that's where she gets to go. It is her home state. She has been through so much. I mean, you think about this summer when she wasn't sure whether she'd be able to ever play volleyball again. What does this mean for her to get to experience this for the first time? Because obviously a transfer from Michigan State, so first time she's been in this spotlight.
Yeah, I think, the story of Sarah Franklin is not only one of the best stories in college volleyball, but it's one of the best stories in college athletics, period. You have a player that is now back in her home state playing in a Final Four, something that really slipped away from them last season in her first year with the Badgers. Now, she's told over the summer that she may never be able to even step on the court again. 3 months later, she's playing the first match, leads a team in kills, and somehow even looks better than she did before all of this happened. And it couldn't have happened to also a better person. And to get that Player of the Year award, I mean, Sarah Franklin's one of the most humble players you'll meet. She's also very confident. She knows her abilities up front. She knows how good she is as a player, but she is very humble about it. And, she doesn't like to brag, but that's our job, right? We get to talk about her at nauseum because she's one of the best stories. And not only that, but one of the best people. So it feels like her having this homecoming and the year that she's had is just icing on the cake. And it's so fun to watch and honestly just a joy to cover her.
Yeah, it's neat. I mean, obviously, you know her far better than I do from covering her, but just the one interview we had with her, she was awesome. Yeah. And she has risen to the occasion here in the tournament, at least 12 kills in all 4 of the Badgers matches. We talk about the inexperience with Nebraska to a certain extent with Pitt as well. It's a different situation with Wisconsin. This is more of a veteran team. Some of them are veterans who have transferred in to this program. But to what extent do you think that can help them against Texas?
Yeah, experience really helps later on in tournaments. And for this Wisconsin team that was so close last season to making that Final Four, that got beaten in 5 on their home court against Pitt, they feel like they have a chip on their shoulder. Every player that comes to Wisconsin wants to win a national championship, and now they're expected to. They did it in 2021. Now their goal is to make it to the Final Four, but not just make it. They want to go as far as possible. Once you hang up one banner, for those players that were there, it feels like they just want a taste of it again. And for the seniors that are on this team, a player like Izzy Ashford, who was there for that 2021 national championship, she wants to go off on a high note. I think these players think back to last year, and that's really motivated them. The minute they lost to Pitt, they were asking Kelly Sheffield, when can we get back in the gym? What can we do to prepare for next season so that doesn't happen again? So we can take care of business in the Elite Eight, get to Tampa, and then not get there, but eventually win a national championship. So experience does play a role in it. You have players that have been there before that have experienced, hoisting that trophy up, and also the disappointment of last season not getting there. So I think experience does help in that sense of it gives you a sense of ease having done it all before, and they have that chip on their shoulder because they want to get back.
Emily, great stuff. We will check in with you again tomorrow, but really appreciate you taking the time out and shedding some light on what should be a fabulous night of volleyball on Thursday.
Oh, the Super Bowl of volleyball. I'm pumped, Dave. Thanks for having me.
The early round of conference play is wound down in the Big Ten, resumes after the new year. 4 teams made it through unscathed, though only Indiana's 2-0. Northwestern Illinois, Wisconsin are 1-0. Purdue leading a group of 7 teams that split their first 2 conference games, with Rutgers, Iowa, and Michigan State all winless. Rayfel Davis is here. We're going to talk some top storylines. I think we have to start with Purdue. They've been the highest-ranked team in the Big Ten throughout the course of the year. What has stood out to you as you've watched the Boilers here early on?
Obviously, you just start with Zach Edey. Everything with Purdue, you start and it finishes with Zach Edey. He's been even more dominant this season, averaging 25 and 11, 2.5 blocks. He's been getting the job done at an extremely high level. And I like the attitude Zach Edey has this year, this get off of me attitude. This is my team. This is my time. Braden Smith has been playing well. This is the Braden Smith, though, that Purdue needs the rest of the season. The game against Alabama, the 27 points, the 19 in the second half, the 8 assists, 1 turnover. When he plays this way, it takes this team to another level. The only player in the country 13 points, six rebounds, 7 assists, just getting the job done at a high level.
The way he rebounds for his size is incredibly impressive. He is a tough guy. I think it's just validated everything that Matt Painter thought in recruiting when he saw him. Remember, he had to kind of recruit him off of videotape because it was during the pandemic, but just felt like he was a player who could hold his own in the Big Ten. He's more than done that despite his smaller size. I'm fascinated to see the game against Arizona this week, because Arizona's really good on the glass, right? And you think about like how Purdue just overwhelms teams with their size, with their rebounding ability. It's not going to happen against the Wildcats.
And that's what I like about this year's Purdue team, because they can beat you in so many different ways. Last season, it was on the glass, dominate you inside. But this season, you look at it, top 5 offense, and they're shooting the ball 41% from deep. Now they don't just have shot takers, they have shot makers. You look at Lance Jones, a guy that's made over 200 career threes. You have to guard him no matter what. I mean, Fletcher Lawyer is a 40% three-point shooter. Braden Smith is shooting at a 45% clip. That Cam Heide can come in and make some shots. Miles Colvin has made shots in limited minutes. This team is better athletically. So you got Lance Jones, can break guys down off the bounce, get in the lane and make plays. But I do like Purdue's chance on the glass. And then also with Purdue, they can get you on the glass. They can make threes, but then they shoot 28 free throws per game. So winning in different ways has really helped this Purdue team this season.
Been a ton of fun to watch. Again, a huge game coming up this weekend in Indy. The flip side of Purdue is Michigan State. I mean, this was a top 5 team to start the year. They're under 500 now, 4-5. It's tied for the worst 9-game start of the Tom Izzo era. What do you think has happened here? Like, what's gone wrong with Michigan State?
I mean, to simply say, I mean, we could talk about the three-point shooting. We could talk about the freshmen not being ready to play early. But you got 4 or 5 juniors and seniors, and it's on those guys. You got Jay Nakins, A.J. Hogarth, Malik Hall, Matty Sissoko. Winning is on your veterans. This is Tom Izzo. He loves to have a player-led team. And you got your backcourt. They're just not playing well. A.J. Hogarth wanted more this offseason. He wanted to come in this season and be the best point guard in the Big Ten, and he just isn't living up to that expectation. Jay Nakins came into last season with some injuries. Coach Izzo raved about him. Coming into this season, was going to have the ball in his hands more, still had an NBA talent, but he's not playing good enough. Both of those guys are shooting sub 30% from the field, and they're really struggling if they can't get those guys going.
I'm with you. It feels like Tyson Walker's the one guy who's kind of lived up to what he was supposed to be. I mean, you start to think about this program and 25 straight NCAA tourneys. I mean, they got some work to do. They got a huge game this weekend against Baylor. I mean, if you don't win that game, you really have nothing on your non-conference schedule, and then you're going to have to rely on winning conference games. So that's a huge one, no doubt, for the Spartans. What about Northwestern? They're the one team, obviously, to beat Purdue. Been a pretty good story here. They do have one loss to Mississippi State, who's kind of been up and down so far this year. But I think we wondered about, especially without Chase Audige, kind of how would they follow up this year after the incredible success they had a season ago. And so far, so good. Boo Buie's obviously been phenomenal. What have you seen from the Cats?
I mean, you watch that Detroit Mercy game, and you start to realize this Northwestern team, they're more than just Boo Buie. He scores 5 points in that game, struggles from the field, but Northwestern Skills gets 91 points in the blowout victory. You look at guys like Ty Berry, who shot 29% from deep last year. He's shooting at 45% from 3 this season. Lang Boring is coming in, and he's coming to his own in the half court. He's been balling out over the last few games. Then you got Brooks Barnheiser. He's kind of stepped into that Chase Audige role defensively, becoming one of the better two-way guys in the league, averaging 13 points, 8 rebounds. Their leading rebounder has 7 assists the other night. Nick Martinelli off of the bench is giving them 22 points in the game. So they have more guys on that perimeter, which is why when you have older guys, you take care of the ball. So Northwestern's taking care of the basketball at a high level. They're turning their opponents over at a high level. And then offensively, they know where their bread is buttered. They're getting the ball to Boo Buie in tight situation. And he's been making a lot of plays this season. His IQ has just increased tremendously.
That Martinelli performance I thought was important the other night. I mean, if you want to nitpick a little bit on them, they're obviously not a great rebounding team. Right. He's a front court player who can get some boards and has an element of toughness about him. But they also weren't getting much production at all off the bench. So to have him be able to come in and give you, especially not just those layups and floaters he's so good at, but to hit some three-pointers is a huge bonus for them. What about Maryland? This is a team that I think a lot of us came into the year thinking they might be in that conversation to be the third best team in the conference. I mean, clearly we kind of thought Purdue and Michigan State 1 and 2. It hasn't played out that way. It has been up and down for Maryland. They blew out Alcorn State last night. I'm not sure how much you read into that. the three-point shooting had been abysmal. They really shot it well last night. Maybe they can use that as a jumping-off point. But what do you think is happening with Kevin Willard's group?
They've been the biggest surprise this season, good or bad, in my opinion. You think about how would you want to build a good Big Ten team? You start with an all-conference point guard, Jameer Young.
Yep.
You get a good big man in a Julian Reese. And then you have that tough, physical, older guy that's been around the block in a Dante Scott. And they have talented freshmen, but they've struggled this season to get it going. I look at Julian Reese, his home numbers versus his away numbers, averaging 19 and 12 at home on 63% from the field. When they leave the Xfinity Center, he struggles, only averaging 11 points and 7 rebounds on 43% from the field. That could be a testament to those guys not getting him the ball early, not getting him the ball where he wants it. But they're struggling to find their big men on the road, and that's hurt them. But then last night, like you said, beating Alcorn State, can't read too much into that one. But what I did see, they made 14 threes. Yeah. 7 different guys made a three, which is encouraging, which means they have guys that can make shots. And then you look at their freshmen, Jamie Kaiser, Deshaun Harris-Smith. I think Maryland is dependent on their freshmen as most of anybody else in this league. Last night, they had their best game as a combination. They scored 24 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, and they combined to go 6 for 11 from the three-point line. Now you're starting to see those freshmen play well in games with confidence. Jameer Young's been balling the last 5 games. I still see it coming together.
Kaiser, Harris-Smith, guys who came in with reputations as shooters. And, I mean, you really couldn't shoot it much worse than this team had up until last night. They're at 22% from three-point range. You just feel like mathematically it has to get better than that. And it did last night, as you said, 14 and 30 behind the arc. Illinois, when we talk about kind of, well, now who slots in behind Purdue, I think you make a pretty strong argument for Illinois. They had that really good week where they were out in the New York, New Jersey area. They won at Rutgers and then had the win in the Garden against FAU. Lost to Tennessee, which I think is a challenging game. But this seems like a more complete team than a year ago. And they seem to enjoy playing with one another more than last year's team did. It just feels like, from an outsider's point of view, the chemistry is a little better. You agree?
They look more much of a cohesive group.
Right.
Talked to Coach Underwood this summer. He had a phrase that he used. He wanted character over characters, and that's what they went out and got. You brought in guys that wanted to win games, wanted to play at a high level, take the team approach. Talked to Luke Goody the other day. He loves being in that locker room this season. He kind of said it without saying it, that last year's locker room wasn't the greatest, but this year's locker room is great. You got a clear-cut leader in Terrence Shannon. He's taking his game to another level. You think of the last 3 games, they played 2 top 20 teams. They played Rutgers, which has one of the better defenses in the country. He's averaged 26 in those games, 33 points at Madison Square Garden. He's taking his game to another level. Their size and their length on the perimeter, their starting 5 goes 6'5" plus across the board, which is why they have one of the better interior defenses in the country and one of the better defenses overall.
Both ends of the court. I know Brad Underwood's delighted with the way this team is playing.
He looks
They've
happy.
really bought in on both ends. Ohio State, I think they're on the list of most improved teams in the Big Ten. Last year was kind of a nightmare. I went through that incredible stretch where they just couldn't win at all in the middle of the season. They did lose at Happy Valley over the weekend, but this is a more complete team, clearly. And they have some young guys who have just grown up here, Ray Feldman.
Yeah, because it's not always about getting old in age. Sometimes you get old in experience. You look at Bruce Thornton as a freshman last year, was thrown into the fire, and I talked to him last week. He just said the game was too fast for him. He said he gets out there, it's fast, it's up and down, the big crowds. And this season, it's really slowed down for him. He's not even averaging a turnover a game, and he's playing 30-plus minutes a game, ball is in his hands. And then you got a guy, Roddy Gale, who could have left last season, entered the transfer portal, went after an NIL after just playing 16 minutes a game, after being a top 50 recruit. And then, like you just said, you got Akpara. He's finding his way. But I think they have the best backcourt in the Big Ten, the best 3-man backcourt. You look at the game against Minnesota, things get tight. All 3 of those guys hit threes in a row. They get 67 points in that game and go 20 for 32 from the field. And now we're starting to see Jamison Battle be the player that Coach Holtman thought he would be. You think about Jamison Battle 2 seasons ago at Minnesota, 17 points a game, honorable all Big Ten mention player. This season, he struggled to kind of fit in, but now he's attracting the 3rd perimeter defender on the opposing team. And if you're putting your 3rd best defender on Jamison Battle, he's going to ball out. 17 points a game over the last 3. he's figuring it out.
Had some nagging injuries last year that I think slowed him down, and Ohio State trying to get back to the NCAA tournament after missing it a season ago. Wisconsin missed the tourney last year as well. Not a major retool on their roster. I mean, they brought back almost all of their scoring from a year ago, but they have a couple pieces that have really helped them. And then just overall, it feels like, again, everyone's taken a step. What have you seen here from the Badgers, who also are a team that seems to be with the arrow pointing up?
I think last season they were just missing a guy like A.J. Storr. You think about a few seasons ago athletically what Johnny Davis gave to that team and getting out in transition, finishing at the basket, breaking guys down off the bounce and going to get a pull-up. That's A.J. Storr. I mean, he's been getting the job done. 18 points against Michigan State, shooting at only a 29% level from three, but he shot 40% from three last season. He made 4 of them against Michigan State. He's their guy when things get stagnant. Get the ball to AJ, go make a play, good or bad, and we can live with it. I think last season, Chucky Hepburn didn't necessarily have that quickness off the bounce. Connor Season didn't have the size off the bounce to get in the lane and make plays. AJ's that guy from this year, and then Max Klesmit. In that second year of his transfer, we've seen it happen with Tyson Walker last season. You're seeing it happen with Terrence Shannon this season. You just get more comfortable in the system. His 21 points against Marquette were big time. It just shows how comfortable he is now.
One of the bigger improvements, no doubt, in the league. John Blackwell, I think he's on that short list discussion for Big Ten Freshman of the Year. He doesn't play a ton, but when he does, man, he gives them some great minutes. And as you say, I mean, Arizona, like, you test yourself against Arizona. You test yourself against Marquette. You win some of those. You don't win all of them. That's what Wisconsin does every year, but it gets them ready once they get into conference play. How about some football talk next? We haven't had much of that. National Bank highlighting the matchup between Alabama and Michigan in the CFP semis on New Year's Day. Two comparable offenses, both in the top 20 nationally in scoring. Wolverines, of course, lead the nation in scoring D. It'll be the 6th ever meeting between these schools. Bama's won the last 2, most recently in the Citrus Bowl 4 years ago. Bruce Feldman from Fox Sports and The Athletic will be there, as will we from the Big Ten Network. And Bruce, let's start with this. I kind of feel like this was the question of last week rather than this week, but we haven't had you on. We haven't heard your take. So just want to get a sense of what you thought of the omission of Florida State from the college football playoff and the fact that Alabama made it in their stead.
Yeah, honestly, I thought it was the wrong decision by the committee. I mean, you have a 13-0 Power 5 champ that beat 2 SEC teams. They, the Heisman Trophy winner, they whipped his team. It was 45-17 with a minute left in the game. I get it. Jordan Travis, their standout quarterback, is out. But to judge them off the third-string quarterback, who probably wouldn't have been starting in a playoff game, I thought that was wrong. And also, look, Alabama lost at home pretty handily against Texas. Yeah, I get it that they're the SEC champ and they beat Georgia, and that's a great win. But it was just, you want to judge how Florida State hasn't looked great down the stretch. It was just the week before the SEC title game that Alabama barely survived against a mediocre Auburn team. By the way, that was a team that lost to New Mexico State and got whipped by them. So I thought it was a wrong decision. To me, the games have to matter. This was not a group of 5 team that was undefeated. This was a team that was a really good defense, but it is what it is. The committee made its decision, and I think it's that being said, I think it's a really terrific matchup with Michigan and Alabama. You have 2 storied programs, 2 really talented dual threat quarterbacks. We're going to see if Jim Harbaugh can get it right, the third time around.
All right, let's dive into the matchup a little bit. What do you see as kind of the biggest key as to what will decide this one?
I think the biggest key is J.J. McCarthy. He looked terrific for much of the season, and then in the last third of the season when the schedule got harder, he looked okay. I don't think he looked great. Was at the Penn State game where they got pressure on him early, and Sharon Moore just leaned into the running game, and knew Penn State's offense wasn't good enough to scare them. Ohio State, he made some plays, but I think I would expect Alabama to go all in on shutting down the Michigan run game, and I think they dare the receivers, tight ends, and JJ to beat them, and we're going to see if he can do it. I think that's the big challenge right now for Michigan, because I think you know what you're getting with Alabama. You have a really dynamic running quarterback, way different than anything that that Michigan has seen this year. You know, last year they had Max Duggan, who was athletic, and he gave them some problems. Obviously, you know, they'd faced Justin Fields a few years ago, but I think this is a different level test for them in terms of the defense. But to me, I'm really interested to see how much different is Jim Harbaugh's approach to preparing for this playoff game, because from everything I'd heard, it wasn't maybe they, you know, over practiced and over prepared and maybe were a little worn down going into the TCU game. Whatever it was, they were not sharp. And I think there's a method that people have to getting into this time of year, and it's not probably coincidental that he's lost a bunch of postseason games, bowl games in a row. So we'll see if they're more dialed in this time around.
Right, to your point, 6 straight bowl losses for Michigan, and you do wonder at a certain point when you have a pattern like that, perhaps you start rethinking the entire way that you're getting ready for this. We certainly know Nick Saban's track record. To give him a month, they should be ready to go, the guys from Tuscaloosa. So we'll see how this one plays out, but fascinated to see. I too, I mean, to me the thing is Milroe and his mobility, because I can just tell you from watching the Big Ten as closely as we do, there is no one like Jalen Milroe in the Big Ten this year. There have been in past years. There isn't this year. So that to me is the big challenge here for this Michigan defense. Obviously, winner of that one gets the winner of Washington against Texas. 2 really good offenses here. Quarterback matchup is fabulous. What stands out there?
You know, I think it's the guy who used to play in the Big Ten stands out. Michael Penix Jr., he was the guy who I voted first for the Heisman. It's been spectacular. They take shots down the field. They have really good receivers. Their offensive line, I think, is underrated. And to me, this is a fun game because you have 2 really explosive offenses. I don't think either defense is elite, especially on the back end. I think Washington is susceptible. Their secondary is not great. It used to be great back in the Buda Baker days. That's not this group. Texas, you know, they lost to Oklahoma. They beat Alabama, but this was a really weak Big 12. I think even by Big 12 standards. You know, they played Oklahoma State, who isn't very good in the conference championship. There is an advantage, I think, that Washington has, and it's that they are really battle tested. I've talked to a lot of coaches for a story I'm working on for next week about these teams, and especially when it came to talking to coaches who face Washington. A lot of the coaches who face them have a ton of respect for that staff and this team, because they say they keep finding ways to win. They keep grinding. And that is a skill after a while. That's not fluky. You know, you have really experienced players and got a ton of respect for Michael Penix Jr. Obviously, Big Ten fans remember him from Indiana. He had so many injuries. And to see how this version of Michael Penix Jr. 2.0 has been really something to behold, especially being on the West Coast. Now, that being said, you know, Steve Sarkisian's a terrific offensive mind. And I think he's going to attack that secondary. I mean, these are to me, this is the best. You can say whatever you want, and I've definitely been outspoken about the Florida State part of this thing, but the matchups for the CFP are phenomenal. I think anybody has a legit chance of winning it all, and then you can't really say that usually.
No doubt. I agree with you 100%. I voted for Penix first for the Heisman as well. You have another former Big Ten quarterback as well, as in Quinn Ewers, obviously made less of an impact in his brief time in Columbus. Michael Penix was great, and obviously all Big Ten fans wish he would have stayed in Bloomington and you would have had a chance to see him play at this level, but certainly don't blame him reuniting with Kalen DeBoer, who was his offensive coordinator, and it couldn't have gone better for him. Interested in some of the transfer portal stuff, as long as we're talking about transfer quarterbacks. Want to get your take on Kyle McCord, kind of what you think it means for Ohio State and where they may go next based on what you're hearing.
Yeah, the what I'm hearing part comes into with NIL. It's not just to Kyle McCord, but you hear about like how the money piece plays into this. What do the money people at the NIL people really want? You know, are they on the exact same page as what the coaching staff thinks? And you know, you hear a lot of different things as it relates to this. Nebraska to me is really interesting right now. You know, you really like the hire of Matt Rule going there. It's a tough job, obviously. You know, up and down first year. But the fact that they are, you know, swinging at the biggest quarterback recruit in the country, and Dylan Raiola was committed to Georgia, you know, everything seems to be trending towards him going to Nebraska. Now you have Kyle McCord, You go from that quarterback room being a major question mark and being so underwhelming for quite some time, especially this year. And all of a sudden, I mean, to me, Dylan Raiola is light years ahead of any of the other prospects in this recruiting class. And you have Mikal McCord, who, he wasn't CJ Stroud, but who is. I think that was the hard part to me for him because, we got to see him a couple of times. Penn State, got to see him against Maryland, got to see him against Michigan. Penn State had the #1 defense in the country. Michigan's really talented on defense. And I think the bar is so high to be an Ohio State quarterback. It was his first year. I mean, he did some really good things against Notre Dame on the road. So if you're a Nebraska fan and somehow that's your quarterback room of those two guys, it's a really good Christmas for you.
What are you hearing on the Buckeyes? Anything out there in terms of who they may land?
Cam Ward is a hot name for a lot of people. He's the guy who's would be a two-time transfer. He started out at Incarnate Word in Texas at FCS, put up big numbers, went to Washington State. A lot of the coaches that my colleague and I, Max Olson, have done this portal tracker for quarterbacks. We've talked to a ton of coaches and kind of had the rankings of what the consensus thinks of these guys. A lot of people thought the two top guys by far were Dylan Gabriel and Cam Ward. Now, Cam Ward is bigger and stronger and has a probably stronger arm, but he's a little more inconsistent. There were a little more turnover issues with him. Everything we'd heard was that he was a guy that if you were not around $1.5 million, you probably weren't going to be in the game for him. And that's obviously a big price tag. He's visited Miami in midweek, and we know that they're interested. We know there's probably a half dozen schools that have at least made a run at him. The question's going to be who's going to win that sweepstakes and who ultimately probably is going to make the strongest NIL package.
I want to ask you about the coaching changes in the Big Ten as well. Jonathan Smith going to Michigan State, Curt Cignetti going to Indiana. Your take on each one of those hires?
Well, first, Jonathan's a really, really terrific coach. What he did at his alma mater in Corvallis was so impressive. In a lot of ways, I feel like what he brings offensively is more in line with what you see in the Big Ten. They're going to run the ball and be physical. That's, their brand. They do some things like you see a little bit with the 49ers and see a little bit of the Dolphins. They have some wrinkles that they add in. I like the hire. I mean, I think it's a tough loss for Oregon State, given what he did there. But to me, this is a really excellent hire. And by the way, he knows what it's like to be in a state where you're not the biggest school there. I mean, Corvallis is like a half hour away from Eugene. Corvallis didn't have Phil Knight School. They didn't have the fancy uniforms. They just won a lot of games, and nobody wanted to go play them at home when they were, at that place. So, good job on Michigan State. It was obviously a disastrous year on a lot of fronts, but they came through and they got a really good hire. Curt Cignetti is going to be interesting in this, that, from talking to people in the Sun Belt, I don't think he can win the same way that they were winning. They had, relatively elite athletes on the defensive line and got after people in that league. And they played really smart, took care of the ball. And those things carry over, but I think it's going to be hard to be on top end of the athlete side when you're at Indiana. But you can't argue with what he did at James Madison. There's a lot of good coaches in that league, and he won a lot of football games, had a really good defense, got his quarterback playing really well, who was a transfer kid who bounced around a lot. And I think it's a good hire. I mean, based on his track record, it's going to be interesting to see, because he came in there guns blazing, as you well know.
He sure did.
Some of his comments. Good for him. I mean, yeah. It's good that people, get everybody talking and everything like that. I mean, Indiana had a good couple of years under Tom Allen. Then everything I'd heard was they just got way left behind on the NIL front. Hopefully the people, the money people there, for Cignetti's case and for the football program's case, get behind it and give them a real chance, because if you don't have that, you can't compete at Indiana in the Big Ten. So we'll see what they do if they, kind of that expression, put their money where their mouth is.
Well, there has been some significant talk of major money in NIL since this Cignetti hire. So we'll see where it gets Indiana as they play around here in the portal. Lots more from Bruce. You can listen to the Audible Pod with Stuart Mandel. It is always informative and entertaining. Bruce, we'll see you in Pasadena. Thanks for your time, man.
Looking forward to it, Dave. Happy holidays.
Same to you. Top players in the Big Ten, you're going to rank them from the top and work your way down. So I have a general feeling where you might be starting, but it's your list. It's not my list. So I'm not going to say. You go wherever you want to go.
I'm going to surprise everybody, and I'm going to start with the big fella, Zach Edey.
No.
Zach Edey has been dominant this season, just to say the least. You look at him when he plays high major competition, the 7 games they played, averaging 28 points, 12 rebounds, over 2 blocks. Just extremely impressive. The 35 points against Alabama, 35 against Northwestern. If he continues on this pace, 23, 24 points a game, he'll go down as Purdue's all-time leading scorer. They have a chance to get to a national championship. He could be the best player to ever play at Purdue, and that's saying a lot.
That is saying quite a bit when you talk about some of the players who have been through there. Glenn Robinson, obviously the first one, a National Player of the Year, who jumps to mind. It's interesting, Ken Pom does his Player of the Year rankings, and the number, it's hard to understand exactly what the number means.
Right.
But he's so far ahead of Kyle Filipowski as number 2 that I went back and I was like, well, when has someone had a number that's comparable to what Zach has? Frank Kaminsky 9 years ago was the last guy who was anywhere close. So he's had a dominant campaign. Yep. Who's after Zach Edey?
You said Frank Kaminsky started giving me nightmares of having to guard him on the block. But Terrence Shannon for sure.
I was wondering why you were in a cold sweat. Yeah.
Terrence Shannon for sure. Terrence Shannon went to test the NBA waters, didn't like what he heard, and he went to the gym and he worked. You think about last season, 32% from 3. Now he's at 42% from 3, and he's making 3 a game, taking close to 6 a game. He's changed his game, become a complete player on both ends of the floor. I'm not shy about saying Terrence Shannon is the best two-way player in all of America. If we weren't talking about Zach Edey right now, Zach Edey wasn't 7-4 in the Big Ten, dominating everything. Terrence Shannon be Player of the Year in the Big Ten. He's been unbelievable.
He's number 3, by the way, in the nation on that Ken Pom list, so he's having a huge year, too. I think it gets a little more challenging after this. It feels like those two have really kind of been the 2 most dominant players in the league. Where are you going after that? I'm going
Boo Buie, the old veteran, the guy that stuck through the hard times, finished 12th place at Northwestern 2 seasons ago, and sat through it and fought through the hard times, and now he's being rewarded. 18 points a game, 5 assists. He's trusting his teammates more. He's sharing the sugar, putting guys in position to be confident. You think of a guy like Ty Berry. He's in the gym with Boo Buie all summer long. He changed his game and took it to the next level. The 31 points, 9 assist game against Purdue, 0 turnovers. Extremely impressive. Boo Buie's been that guy for Northwestern.
He has gotten so much better with his shot selection through the years, and he makes really good decisions with the ball, as you talked about. He's having a phenomenal year. So who's after Boo?
I'm going to go Bruce Thornton. You look about Ohio State from last season to this season, finishing towards the bottom of the league. I know that feeling. And Bruce Thornton went in the gym, and he put in the work. Took his scoring average from 10 points a game to 18 points a game. And he's playing 31 minutes per contest, is not even averaging a turnover. It's extremely impressive to do that, have the ball in your hands, come off all those ball screens, set guys up. The 29 points against Alabama, 5 games with 20-plus points or more. He's been dominant on the offensive end. He's averaging over a steal per game, taking the charge on both ends of the floor, really being the head of the snake.
His assist-to-turnover ratio is nearly 5-1.
That's crazy.
It is staggeringly good. And again, he's he handles the ball a ton, right?
Yep.
I mean, a high-volume player, and he's 5th in the league in scoring. Time for one more. Where would you go next?
Braden Smith. And Braden Smith is the most underappreciated guard, maybe even player in the country. The only player in the country right now to average 13 points, 7 assists, 6 rebounds, and does it at a high level. Really exerts his energy on the offensive end. When he's aggressive, it takes Purdue to the magic level. And you've seen that against Alabama. Because if I'm Alabama, we make 19 threes. Our best player scores 35. We're supposed to win that game, and Braden Smith just took it over in the second half. 19 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 0 turnovers. He's becoming that quintessential point guard that Matt Painter likes.
Just not a big guy, right? Nope. And so I think, like, at first glance, you look at him, and you look at where his recruiting was and who else wanted him, and you say, I wonder whether he's going to belong. I think he's erased any doubts
a lot of heart
about whether or not he belongs. A lot of heart, but a lot of talent, too.
Yes, sir.
Man, he is a really, really good player. Enjoy the hoops tonight. We will see you tomorrow on Big Ten Today.